It was kind of put on hold for a while during the war, picked up right afterwards with an extraordinary campaign of corporate propaganda. It's not studied much. In fact, the first academic study of it just came out. This is one of the most important things in modern American history. Literally, the first book just came out by University of Illinois Press a couple months ago, another one in Australia. And in fact, there is an Australian scholar who's been writing about this for years. I've been writing about it mainly using his work, I should say. But an American study finally came out, and it's pretty interesting. Right after the Second World War, the business community, the country was social democratic, very social democratic at that time, and they knew it. And the business leaders said that they had to renew with vigor what they called the everlasting battle for the minds of men and indoctrinate citizens with the capitalist story. They said that we have 3 to 5 years to resell our preferred way of life. And they went after it with a vengeance. Anti-union campaigns, anti-unionism was, the idea was, as they put it, to sell anti-unionism as anti-American. Huge campaigns were undertaken, the sort of, we versus them. There's us as the sober working man and the housewife and the corporate executive slaving away for everyone's benefit, and they are those outsiders, the strikers who are coming to try to disrupt their harmony. There was huge business about this. At that time, there was a vigorous labor press. The one-dimensional press of American society is fairly recent. There were about 800 labor newspapers back in the 1950s with tens of millions of people reading them. They were condemning the corporate media, as they put it, for damning labor at every opportunity, while carefully glossing over the sins of the banking and industrial magnates who really control the nation. That had to be destroyed, of course, and the reason is that truth is subversive. It's anti-American and has to be eliminated, and it was destroyed with a tremendous power play. This covered everything from the entertainment industry to the corporate media to the schools and so on. Billions of dollars a year were devoted to this, taking over schools, churches, recreational activities, anything you can think about. The corporate media, of course, are right in the center of it. The films were quite important, commercial films as well as propaganda films. Propaganda films were reaching business propaganda was reaching 20 to 30 million people a year in the early 50s. Business was providing about a third of all school materials. This was not a small thing. On top of that, there's a whole commercial industry, like, the standard depiction of unions in the movies is sort of Marlon Brando on the waterfront. Tough working class Joe stands up against union bosses, and because that's and unions, in fact, were portrayed as something that the workers have to fight against, just as people have to be liberated to leave New York. Workers had to be freed from the oppression of the unions, and a huge amount of energy and effort was put into this. It was pretty successful. The unions tried to combat it, but they couldn't even come close. The concentration of capital was so enormous that it wasn't even a battle. This picked up again in the 1970s. There was another upsurge with foundations trying to take over the educational institutions, so, Olin professorships of free enterprise and glossy right-wing student magazines, very well funded all over the place, and so on and so forth. It's had an effect. The effect has been to pretty much demolish civil society, to turn people into what is the ideal. The ideal is very clear. The ideal is a completely fragmented, atomized society where everyone's totally alone, doing nothing but trying to pursue created wants, and the wants are created. It's known that they're created. Nobody wants those things. You create wants. People are stuck with their television set or, their interactive, whatever it is, and they're glued to this thing, and they're told what they want, and they have to want it. They don't have any connection with anyone else. You don't see anybody else. You don't deal with anyone else. You're an atom of consumption, and you go to work at lower and lower wages for more and more hours and less benefits and security in a flexible labor market. That's the kind of utopia that they're looking for, and it's not very far from there. it's led to very strange effects in the country. I mean, the country is like a devastated peasant society. You know, you really have to go back to Europe and the Black Death, I think, 14th century, to find anything similar. People are scared, angry, hostile, hate everything, don't know what they hate, you know, don't have anybody else to talk to, just angry, desperate. There are cults all over the place at a scale that is unknown in any other society. I mean, you have to, the level of religious fundamentalism alone is probably the highest in the world. I'm almost certain higher than Iran, you know, and that's only one of them. You know, the people right now, the militias happen to be on the front pages, but that's just a tiny fragment of it, and it's only not the right. The left is the same, you know. It's across the board. It's just a dissolved society, very scary. It's the portent is ominous. You know, it's the kind of a situation, and it's a kind of a situation which is indeed reminiscent of Germany in the late 30s in a lot of ways, or Iran in the late 70s. You know, very frightening, and it's much more frightening when it happens here. At the same time, it's a kind of an organizer's dream. You know, people, if you look at people's attitudes, they remain social democratic. Like, you know, people are overwhelmingly believe that working people ought to have more influence. They don't have enough. That the government ought to help poor people. That's its job. You know, that people are overwhelmingly opposed to things like budget balancing, if, for example, it's going to cut down educational or health expenditure, and so on across the board. As I say, it doesn't matter because it's irrelevant to policy. They do what they like. But it's a situation in which the opportunities for organizing and rebuilding a democratic culture are very, very high. And it can be done, but it's certainly not going to happen by itself. You know, it's going to happen take the same kind of energy and activism that it's taken to lift us out of feudalism and slavery and every other horror in the past. The Oklahoma City bombing, so bringing the chickens home to roost, well, unfortunately, there's a little more truth to that than the press is willing to make out. Turned out in this case, you remember at the beginning they were looking for some Middle East connection, and they would have bombed anybody in sight if they'd found it. You could tell that right off. Didn't work, so you're stuck with the angry white men. And the source of that is quite real. They have every reason to be angry. There's a lot to be angry about. I'm assuming that the current stories are correct, that the sectors from which this is coming, there's plenty to be mad at. But I don't think people know what to be angry about. What has been created by this half century of massive corporate propaganda is what's called anti-politics. So anything that goes wrong, you blame the government. Well, okay, there's plenty to blame the government about. But the government is the one institution in which that people can change. It's the one institution you can affect by participation without institutional change, right? That's exactly why all the anger and fear is directed against the government. The government has a defect. It's potentially democratic. Corporations have no defect. They're pure tyrannies. So therefore you want to keep corporations invisible and focus all anger on the government. So you don't like something, you know, your wages are going down, blame the government, you know. Not blame the guys in the Fortune 500 because you don't read the Fortune 500, you know, thing. You just read what they tell you in the newspapers. So you don't read about the dazzling profits and the stupendous this and the wages going down and so on. All you know is that the bad government's doing something, so let's get mad at the government. As I say, plenty to be mad about the government, but the government is exactly what Dewey described it as. It's the shadow cast by business over society. You want to change something, change the substance, not the shadow. And everyone contributes to this, including the Democrats. They're deeply committed to it. You take a look at the Clinton campaign literature. It's like, you know, it's a I don't know what public relations firm wrote it, but whatever one did it understands their business. The thing that they were giving out at the drugstores, you know, 10 cents on their mandate for change, as they called it, incidentally a slogan that they borrowed from Eisenhower, which shows how much change they contemplated. The first chapter of it was called Entrepreneurial Economics. And that was their big economic program. I explained how we're not old-fashioned liberals, you know, who believe in entitlements and getting children food to eat and that sort of thing. We're interested in entrepreneurial economics. And then they go on to describe it. And read it carefully. very interesting to see how the mind of the commissar works. You know, the really skilled propagandists, guys who get trained in the good universities. The way it works